Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Leila Al-Sheikhli from Al Jazeera Television, and it's my pleasure to be with you at this private sector forum taking place on the margins of the Second World Summit for Social Development here in Doha. Welcome to all of you. This forum, under the theme Business for Social Development, Building Inclusive Futures, brings together leaders from business, government, civil society, and of course the United Nations, all united by one goal, and that is to make growth more inclusive, sustainable, and fair for everyone. You know how it is in today's world. Everybody's running. Everything is changing, and it's happening so fast. It's happening in the way we work, the way we live, the way we connect with each other. But also there's something with change that comes that's positive, and that is opportunities. Opportunity for business to help build societies that are more resilient, more equal, and more innovative. Throughout today, we will be listening to interesting perspectives and inspiring perspectives from business leaders and policymakers, because it's not about words, it's about actions. It's about creating decent jobs. It's about advancing social inclusion and strengthening communities around the world. So let's begin this morning with welcome remarks from Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the United Nations General Assembly. Please.
Good morning, Excellencies, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. As we are here with business leaders with you, let's talk numbers. The window of time to deliver on our commitments on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is rapidly closing, with only a little over 4 years remaining. And with the annual financing gap for sustainable development goals currently standing at $4 trillion, one of the key barriers we face is financing. But we know, you know, that money as such is not the problem. There is plenty in our global economy. The question rather is how and where it is invested. It is crystal clear that public financing alone cannot close the SDG gap. Therefore, it is up to you, it is up to us to essentially mobilize private institutions, private investments and investors to provide capital for sustainable development. And the good thing is there has been progress. We know the solutions. Private capital mobilization reached an all-time high of $21.9 billion in 2022. Yet this still represents less than 20% of total funds mobilized, and it must grow significantly to meet the moment. And let me be clear, we are not asking the private sector to act out of charity. Businesses stand to gain directly from contributing to sustainable development goals. The evidence is compelling. Companies with strong environmental, social, and governance performance report operating margins 10% higher than cost of capital 20% lower. In simple terms, they are more profitable. Inclusive business models, those that create employment, expand accesses to services, and uplift communities, strengthen societies, but they also strengthen their own share values. They are investment in social stability and market confidence. They help create the very environment in which business can grow and prosper. The opposite is also true. When inequality deepens, markets fracture. When societies prosper, markets expand, to the benefit of both the public and the private sectors. And this is increasingly recognized by the businesses community itself. As just one example, the UN Global Compact CEO study of 2024 found that 9 in 10 CEOs believe sustainability is key to long-term success. In the climate field, the world recognized 2 years ago at the COP in Dubai that the future is renewable, creating a win-win situation for private investments. And there's no way backwards, even though if you would deny the climate crisis, because we have reached a peak. And this is a good thing about the peaks. No one wants to have stranded investments. Consider Africa, which is abandoned in sunlight and starving for more electricity. This is a prime opportunity for renewable energy investment. Yet, and this is the thing we really have to tackle, only 4.2 gigawatts of renewable capacity was added in 2024, compared to over 421 gigawatts in Asia the same year. So again, the question is, how do we bring the finance to the places where we need it? Not only to end social injustice, but also to unbundle all the potential of renewable energy. To unlock this potential and deliver mutual benefits for communities and investors alike, we must dismantle the barriers holding back capital flows. And I have been working in this field in my previous capacity a lot. It's not that investors do not want to invest. It's not that governments do not want to work together. And this is the point which also touches me. So we just have to enable the matching altogether. And this is where we have to see that we have to build on trust. This is why international cooperation matters, because with price volatility, it needs trust that your investment again is not stranded. Building that environment requires common financial frameworks fit for the 21st century, scaled up international funds, and the removal of unnecessary restrictions that stifle innovation, as outlined in the Seville Commitment on Financing for Sustainable Development. Indeed, social development is one of the most transformative investments a business can make. Yet today, 1.3 billion people still live in poverty, facing barriers to education, healthcare, and opportunity. This is not only a moral failure, it is a profound loss of human and economic potential. Every person who raises out of poverty has the potential to become an entrepreneur, an innovator, a consumer, a driver of shared prosperity. Inclusive business models could unlock an estimated $12 trillion in market opportunities and create 380 million jobs by 2030. And again, the private sector is not starting from zero. There's strong guidance already available, including the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the United Nations Global Compact, and the ILO Tripartite Declaration of Principles concerning multinational enterprises and social policy. All of these provide clear frameworks for responsible and impactful business conduct. We are knowing the solutions are there. It is now up to us to join forces, to stand together, and to understand that we are all consumers, citizens, UN institutions, and business people better together. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, for your inspiring words, especially when it comes to emphasis on trust, which is probably the core of the summit in a whole and this forum as well. Thank you very much for your inspiration and for your leadership. I would like to invite now His Excellency Dr. Ali bin Saeed bin Smekh Al-Marri, the Minister of Labor of the State of Qatar.
أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسرني في البداية أن أرحب بكم جميعا في الدوحة، عاصمة الحوار والشراكة الدولية من أجل التنمية، في هذا الحدث البارز الذي يجمع بين صناع القرار وقادة الأعمال والمجتمع الدولي تحت مظلة القمة العالمية الثانية للتنمية الاجتماعية. ويشرفني أن أشارككم اليوم افتتاح منتدى القطاع الخاص الذي يعد أحد أهم المنصات العالمية لمناقشة الدور المتنامي للقطاع الخاص في دعم أهداف التنمية الشاملة والمستدامة. إن انعقاد هذا المنتدى في الدوحة يجسد التزام دولة قطر الراسخ بالعمل الجماعي الدولي لتحقيق التنمية الاجتماعية، ويؤكد إيماننا العميق بأن القطاع الخاص شريك أساسي في مسيرة التنمية وعنصر محوري في بناء اقتصادات متنوعة وشاملة قادرة على توفير فرص عمل لائقة وتعزيز العدالة الاجتماعية. سيدات والسادة، لقد أدركت دولة قطر مبكرا أن التنمية لا تتحقق إلا بتكامل الأدوار بين الحكومات والقطاع الخاص والمجتمع المدني. ومن هذا المنطلق تبنت الدولة رؤية شاملة تستند إلى رؤية قطر 2030 التي تضع الإنسان في قلب التنمية، وتركز على تنويع الاقتصاد وتمكين القطاع الخاص ورفع كفاءة القوى العاملة الوطنية وتهيئة بيئة عمل منتجة وآمنة تراعي حقوق جميع العاملين. وقد عملت وزارة العمل في إطار هذه الرؤية على تنفيذ إصلاحات تشريعية ومؤسسية رائدة شملت تطوير أنظمة العمل والتفتيش والسلامة المهنية وتعزيز الحوار الاجتماعي وتوسيع برامج التدريب والتأهيل المهني، بما يسهم في تحقيق العمل اللائق للجميع. كما تم إطلاق مبادرات وطنية مبتكرة لتعزيز مشاركة القطاع الخاص في التنمية الاجتماعية وتشجيع ممارسات المسؤولية المجتمعية والاستدامة المؤسسية، ودمج البعد الاجتماعي في الخطط الاقتصادية والاستثمارية. الحضور الكريم، إن العالم اليوم يواجه تحديات مركبة تتطلب حلولا شاملة ومبتكرة تقوم على الشراكة والتكامل بين القطاعين العام والخاص. ومن هنا تأتي أهمية هذا المنتدى بوصفه فرصة لتبادل التجارب الناجحة واستكشاف آفاق جديدة للتعاون، خاصة في مجالات تنمية المهارات والتوظيف والتحول الرقمي والتمويل المستدام. وفي هذا السياق تؤكد دولة قطر دعمها المستمر للمبادرات الدولية الهادفة إلى تعزيز العدالة الاجتماعية وتحقيق العمل اللائق والنمو الاقتصادي المستدام، انسجاما مع أهداف الأمم المتحدة للتنمية المستدامة ولا سيما الهدف الثامن. كما نجدد دعوتنا إلى توسيع الشراكات بين الحكومات والقطاع الخاص من أجل تحقيق التنمية التي تضع الإنسان في مقدمة أولوياتها. ختاما، أتوجه بالشكر إلى منظمة أصحاب العمل والأمم المتحدة على تنظيم هذا المنتدى، وإلى جميع الشركاء الذين ساهموا في إنجاح هذا الحدث. كما أعبر عن تقديري لممثلي القطاع الخاص الذين يشاركون اليوم بأفكارهم وتجاربهم الملهمة في بناء مستقبلا أكثر شمولا واستدامة. نسأل الله أن يوفقنا جميعا بما فيه خير الإنسانية، وأن يجعل من هذا المنتدى خطوة متقدمة نحو تحقيق التنمية الاجتماعية التي ننشدها جميعا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
اللهم آمين. شكرا جزيلا معالي الوزير على هذه الكلمة الملهمة يعني التي تشكل أيضا أساس لما تقوم به دولة قطر في هذه الفترة المهمة. I wish to please welcome Mr. Roberto Suarez Santos, the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers.
Madam President of the General Assembly, His Excellency, our friend, Dr. Al-Miri, Minister of Labor of Qatar, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Good morning. Very warm welcome to all of you. It's more than an honor, it's a pleasure to open this private sector forum at the Second World Summit for Social Development. I would like to begin by extending my sincere appreciation to the Global Compact, to UNDESA, for co-hosting this important event with us. Sincere appreciation also from us, I would say also the three of us, to the government of Qatar. Your commitment has been instrumental in creating this space for dialogue between the private sector, governments, but also with other stakeholders. Also, I see also representatives of NGOs and also the trade union movement. I thank you also especially the President of the General Assembly, Madame Baerbock, for also including the private sector as part of this summit. The political declaration of the summit has been adopted yesterday, a landmark reaffirmation of shared commitment to social justice, and we are not shy as business to talk about social justice, full employment, inclusive growth. It reminds us that progress towards the SDGs is only possible, and Your Excellency already highlighted that, when all of us work together. This is indeed a special moment, a moment of uncertainty, a moment of doubt, a moment of crisis of institutions. But we could hardly be in a better place than Doha to push an agenda of cooperation. This city has become a true crossroads for global dialogue and for cooperation. And I have to remind you that it was here during the Least Developed Countries Summit conference that we, IOE, joined also many of you, including UN resident coordinators and also business federations that are also now joining here to advance a new partnership. Returning to Doha today feels like enhancing not just this conversation, but action with a stronger sense of shared purpose. In the spirit of partnership, I'm delighted to announce that together with the Global Compact, we are presenting a joint communique as an outcome of this forum. This communique demonstrates a commitment to push this agenda further. And as we embark on what could be a busy and productive day today, allow me to highlight quickly 5 areas of commitment and action. First, we cannot insist more. We need a proper environment for business to operate in an inclusive agenda. The private sector role as main provider of jobs, as main provider also of progress, enterprise, small, medium, large companies also drive not just investment, but also innovation, creativeness. If you kill that, you keep the capacity to advance. What we call sustainable enterprise require an enabled environment to fulfill the role, to drive growth and decent jobs. Second, we were discussing in NIOE about values and how we have evolved in terms of values. We were created when the ILO was created. And we are now seeing an evolution in terms of how we engage in business growth with these values. We are now strongly committed to fundamental principles and rights of growth. We are also committed to the human rights agenda. We also see that there is value and strong business value also to commit on sustainable development goals. We would like also the UN family and other stakeholders to engage also in the value of business and business environment and business growth as a driver also of engaging on results, concrete results. Third, social dialogue. Employers and workers' organizations have a key role to play. Independent social partners are really anchored in the real economy. They understand the realities of work. They understand the dynamics of production. If we push the agenda of social dialogue, if we push the agenda of employers and workers' organizations in process, not just globally, but also locally, we will get results. And these results will be legitimate and effective. Fourth, this is an obsession that we have, skills education. You refer to just transition, climate change. The driver of change for inclusion is skills enhancement. We are far away from being there. You will next week, I think it's next week, 2 weeks time, we'll start in COP in Berlin the discussion on how we promote the just transition, how we enhance this agenda, but it's still far away. The NDCs still do not include properly a skills agenda. The fundamental cure for poverty is not money, but knowledge. We need to be aware of that. Investing in education, in quality education, lifelong learning is a duty from all of us. Fifth is productivity. Productivity growth is not acceptable that 60% of the entire occupied population is still in the formal sector. There is no decent job there. There is no social protection. If we are not much more effective, ambitious in driving a productivity agenda to promote transitions to formality, we will not get there. Excellencies, colleagues, today's forum is about translating principles to action, as you said. We are responsible. We have to go home also with a clear message to our children, to our people, what we have achieved from here. We want sustainable enterprise that help this agenda. We are not shy about that. The political declaration can give us a solid framework. Now we have to act. We have to act together. We have to be much more effective, governments, employers, NGOs, trade unions, to move this declaration from commitment to cooperation and shared responsibility. Through our network of more than 150 business organizations that are independent and are representative, we commit also to support that, to implement this declaration, bringing not just practical experience, but also policy commitment. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Suarez Santos. Your emphasis on not being shy to speak about social injustice and the commitment to values is really what we are looking forward to here. And I think everybody, I can speak on behalf of everybody here, is looking forward to have a dialogue that supports that in many ways. Thank you very much. And now I would like to welcome Ms. Tony Lem, Chief of Programs at the United Nations Global Compact.
Your Excellency, Madam President of the General Assembly, Excellency, Honorable Minister of Labor of Qatar, business leaders, colleagues, and distinguished guests. On behalf of the UN Global Compact, I am equally honored to formally also welcome you to the Private Sector Forum of the Second World Summit for Social Development, co-organized by the UN Global Compact with the International Organization of Employers and the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We are meeting today at a pivotal moment, one rich in milestones, meaning and reflection. 30 years after the Copenhagen Summit set poverty eradication, full and productive employment, and social integration as key foundations of development. 30 years after the Beijing Declaration recognized women's rights as human rights and established an international framework for gender equality, the women's empowerment principles remain instrumental in advancing this agenda. Almost 15 years since the adoption of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights that laid the foundation for responsible business conduct rooted in respect for human dignity. 25 years since the founding of the UN Global Compact to put a human face to the global market and has now evolved as the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world, with 23,000 businesses in more than 160 countries committed to 10 principles in the areas of human rights, environment, labor, and anti-corruption. The political declaration adopted yesterday here in Qatar is a powerful commitment to social development, inclusion, and human rights, and provides a much-needed push towards the delivery of the SDGs. However, the corporate sustainability landscape today is very different from when the foundations were laid before. This private sector forum highlights the critical role of business in sustainability and encourage partnerships to navigate challenges posed by geopolitical tension, policy regression, opposition to ESG framing, and trade tariffs. Despite these, businesses worldwide continue to create jobs, tackle workplace inequality, build skill, and provides lifelong learning, showing their important role as an engine in social development. Businesses are also proactively addressing the socioeconomic challenges associated with the energy transition and digital transformation, achieving greater effectiveness when aided by supportive policies and innovative financial instruments. As the world of work evolves, businesses also adapt to technology while leveraging vital human skills, responding to changing employee values, and increasing customer demand for responsible consumption and production. We are encouraged to see action taking place and continued resolve to stay the course of sustainability. From our latest CEO study, we know that Global Compact CEOs plan to maintain or increase their environmental, social, and governance commitments, citing a stronger business case for sustainability today than 5 years ago. Most also believe that future CEOs should prioritize speaking out on social issues. More than 2,300 companies in the Global Compact are committed to taking bold actions under our Forward Faster initiative in the areas of climate action, gender equality, living wage, water resilience, sustainable finance, accelerating advancement on the SDGs. These commitments do not just represent words on paper. They signal a fundamental shift in how businesses view their purpose and responsibility in society. In the context of a dynamic regulatory landscape and heightened scrutiny, businesses continue to progress on sustainability under quiet pragmatism, and they are seeking multi-stakeholder partnerships to continue to act with credibility. Today, we are also proud, as Roberto mentioned, to launch a new communique calling for greater business-government collaboration to advance inclusive and sustainable social development. This statement underscores a shared commitment that neither governments nor companies can address today's social challenges alone. Delivering decent work, strengthening social protection systems, closing persistent inequality gaps, and ensuring no one is left behind requires coordination, action, mutual accountability, and aligned incentives. At the UN Global Compact, we stand ready to support the implementation of the political declaration together with the private sector, building on the Pact for the Future and other United Nations frameworks. We will mobilize business to transform sustainability ambition into action at the scale the world demands, advancing human rights, expanding decent work, promoting living wages, closing the gender gap, and accelerating inclusive and sustainable economic growth everywhere. I thank you all for your engagement and dedication to social sustainability. We look forward to productive discussions today. Thank you.
Indeed, we all look forward to that. And thank you very much, Ms. Lim, for underscoring the importance of business partnership in driving social development and inclusion, as you mentioned. Thank you very much. Actually, thanks to all our opening speakers for setting the stage for today's discussion. Thank you so much for being with us. Okay, now the action begins. We'll now move on then to our first conversation, a dialogue with business leaders on how enterprises can be driving force for inclusive social development. But before I introduce our moderator, I want to ask, is there another Layla or Laila in the audience? No? The reason I'm asking, because our moderator is Miss Laila Humaira of Euronews, and in Arabic we say if there are 3 Lailas, then we find the treasure then. So, so unfortunately, but the treasure will be in the discussion. That's what we look forward to. Laila Humaira will be moderating this discussion, joined by Ms. Sonia Janahi, the Vice President for Asia International Organization of Employers, IOE, and CEO of Maya and SJ Investments. I invite you to come to the stage, please. And Mr. Dan Vensing, the CEO of IDH, and also Mr. Ashraf Abu Isa, the CEO and Chairman of Abu Isa Holding.
Test, test. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Sorry for that. Thank you for your patience. A very good morning again to distinguished guest delegates, not just the ones who are joining us here this morning, but also the ones joining us on UN Web Live TV. So thank you so much. And I wanted to get straight into our conversation because it's so important to get all of our esteemed speakers' thoughts on the. I mean, the tone has already been set, but just to get everyone's opinions and thoughts on our discussion today. So I wanted to start with the private sector. How can the private sector position itself as a driving force for social development, especially when we look at advancing the summit's goals of poverty eradication, as what's mentioned before, full and productive and meaningful employment, and social integration, but at the same time, strengthening its own long-term resilience and competitiveness? We'll start with you, Dan.
Is it work? Yeah. Okay, great. Good morning. Thank you, Laila. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A real pleasure to be here. And congratulations also to the organizers, first of all, of the entire summit, but secondly, also of this private sector forum. I think it's crucially important that we indeed discuss the role of the private sector, because it is already, of course, an engine for the development. However, we need to make it more intentional and we need to make it more inclusive. If you look at global trade, which is also the profession of IDH, then you can already see that 80% of it is driven by the private sector, and it generates hundreds of millions of jobs. But we can take it a step forward. If we can link growth with more fairness, and the private sector can do that, we can pair innovation with inclusivity. We can pair wages with well-being. We can pair productivity with decent jobs. And if we do that, then we can really drive. Because if you look at the power of the private sector, through its procurement, through its innovation, through its investment, billions and billions of dollars are invested every year. And that can really be the catalyst for social development. And I think also there, looking at the political declaration that was indeed accepted yesterday, and also the speech of the Secretary General, which included living wage, I think it is important that the UN system champions this whole concept and drives it forward, because the private sector can't do it alone. And the support of government and the UN system is so important. And why the concept of living wage? Because it connects human rights with economic development and equality. And if companies embrace the concept of living wage, then there is a true business case, because it builds trust with the stakeholders. It actually increases retention. And at the same time, it really is an engine for development. So yes, I think the private sector is a key stakeholder in this summit and turning the commitment into real action.
Sorry.
I think it was on. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Leila. And thank you, everybody, for having us today. Congratulations to Qatar for such an impressive summit that has been held, and a successful summit, I have to say. Well, let me start by saying, as the private sector, we don't have a competing agenda when it comes to social development. In fact, we complement each other. If you ask every single employer that's here available from the private sector, what is the first thing that comes to your mind before you sleep or before you wake up? And they will tell you one thing: our team, our people. Because without our people, without our team, we cannot drive. We cannot basically drive the engine of the private sector. We cannot ensure that we have the economy, the resilience, the sustainability, and all these factors. So in fact, we complement each other, we go along with each other, but we also need to take into perspective that we have more than 98% of many economies SMEs, and many of them are even micro companies. How can we support them to have the right infrastructure to ensure that they add value and they are part of the social development? And believe me, they are, in their own small micro ways, because they are today creating job opportunities. They are today creating innovation. They are driving, they're sustainable, they're persistent, and they are ensuring that life goes on. And this is where social development happens. This is where you add value. This is where you put your mark. So even that micro company, that small company, which is considered part of the private sector, but a big part of the private sector, is adding value. But we need to have all the players work together cohesively. We need to have the infrastructure in place, and we need to focus on skilling. We need to focus on upskilling. But if you don't have the infrastructure in place, it won't work. In the Gulf, we're comfortable to say that we're lucky because we have an environment where all the counterparts are talking together. The government listens to the private sector, but also ensures that it's a win-win situation. And this is how it should be. We need to ensure that whatever policies are put in place, it is not going to diminish the private sector, because the moment you do that, then where is social development? In fact, you need to put in policies that enhance the private sector to ensure that the private sector will be sustainable enough to give more to social development and add value. I'm going to give you just one example, and then I'm going to give it to my colleague. My business is chocolate making, and I'm very passionate about chocolate making. And 90% of my employees started as dishwashers. But when I saw that they had the passion to be skilled and to learn and to develop, today many of them are working for the biggest 5-star hotels as executive chefs. Some of them are still with me continuing, but I'm so proud of them. So this shows what value the private sector can give in terms of skilling, upskilling, if there is the right policies that support the private sector, not just to spend money on issues that are basically beyond them, but to develop the business, to ensure that the team is skilled and developed, not just to stay with us, but the sky is the limit and they can go and chase their dreams anywhere they want. Thank you.
Thank you. For us in Qatar, of course, we follow always the country's culture. And normally in every country there's a culture, and in every corporation there's a culture. In Qatar, we keep saying that we are, in Arabic we say Ka'bat al-Madiyum, means the destination of the oppressed as a nation, as a country. And that also reflects on the private sector. We don't like unfairness. We don't like, and the government is always the labor rights and the human rights organizations has been very, very tough on the private sector. Of any small incident, any small incident, there's an open door for any labor to go and complain, and he will be very well heard. In Islam, we say that you pay the workers their wages before their sweat dries. you know. So our Prophet, peace upon him, said that, and then we actually in Qatar implement that. It's just not talk. You know, we have a system in our Ministry of Labor. It's called WPS, Wages Protection System. Every private sector company has to register in that, and if first week of the month, if wages are not paid, then you get a call. Say, what's the problem? Why you're not paying people? And not only that, but they say, okay, if you need for financial issues or something, we have a system in place that can loan you some money until you fix your. But labor should be paid on time. So not only us as the private sector, but also government insists on that, and they monitor that on a daily basis. So very well monitored. So it created this nice culture of protecting labor and protecting workers and make sure that it's very sustainable and people enjoy their time in Qatar. Our labor camps has very strict rules in terms of how many square meters per labor, their food, their well-being. If it's too hot, there is, in weather, especially in summer, there are hours that you cannot work outdoors. So it's very, very well looked after. As a company, we have around 3,000 employees. We are in different sectors of the market. We have adopted something about 15 years ago called Talent Management Department. So we assess by a third party all the employees of the company, and we choose between 20 and 40 employees every year. And it doesn't matter what ranking they are in the company. And then we put them in a fast track program. There's a special department for that, trying to improve them. And without any sometimes these employees would require a simple thing like just adding or perfecting a second language, or as simple as a driver license, or as sophisticated as sending them to Harvard Business School, for example. You know, it could vary depending on the employee's level. And this is not conditional. So we just work on them and trying to empower them to become better people in general and better employees, specifically or to the task that they are assigned for. We continuous training. Every employee gets at least 2 trainings a year. Some people more, depending on their position and also the company's. So it's very much a comprehensive system that we follow in Qatar, and the government is very cooperative, especially Minister of Labor. Maybe none of them are here now; they left with the minister. But I have to say that behind, you know, they keep calling us and say, okay, what can we do to help you? How can we improve? How can we improve? Qatar has a special situation. I mean, we are if you look at the population, most of the people who live here are foreigners. Most of them are people who are here on work visas. So if you're not happy or if you're not satisfied, then it will be a big mess in the country. You know? So you have to make sure that our guests, we call them guests, are also very well looked after.
And at the core of it, I feel the message has been the respect for labor that's being done and empowering through upskilling and skills. I'm going to be a bit cheeky here. I would take payment in chocolate, from Maya, Sonia. Payment in chocolate. I want to pivot a little bit to bring in the power of collaboration and collaborating between stakeholders. How can collaboration between businesses, governments, and civil society help navigate the global transformations of our time when we look at digitalization, the climate transition, climate crisis, honestly, demographic change, and inequality? And actually, these are, quite frankly, not just transformations of these times, but it's going to change the entire course in the future as well. So how can all stakeholders ensure that innovation and productivity advance the summit's goals?
No, thank you. And indeed, I couldn't agree more that we really need the public-private partnerships. It's also the bedrock of our own organization. And I'll give you a few examples. So the first one starts from a retail perspective. So I come from the Netherlands, and in quite a few European countries, if you would walk into a brick and mortar retail outlet, then one of the first products you see are bananas. I think that about 90% of the shoppers in European outlets, they buy bananas every single visit. So it's maybe a surprise to you, maybe not. Any country has its own peculiarities, and this is one of the crops really that, you know, it's used by retailers to draw people into the shop. But in bananas, actually there are huge living wage gaps on the plantations where the bananas are grown. So based on a very visible product and a need from retailers, we have convened coalitions in the Dutch, the Belgium and the UK market, expanding to other European markets, that bring together 27 European retailers on a pre-competitive basis. Because they said, if we go this alone, right, my bananas might become a little bit more expensive and the consumer will go to the shop next door. But if we all do this collectively in a pre-competitive setting, then there is no competition on it, and we can actually move this agenda forward. And then we went into the implementation, right? Because a pledge to start closing living wage gaps is great, but it's all about the action, which is of course also the topic of today's summit. And then we opened up, because then we need to invite the trade unions in, we need to invite the governments in, we need to invite civil society in to really make this work. And that is happening on a real-time basis right now in many of the producing countries of where the bananas originate from that end up in European retail stores. And I think that is a powerful example of collective action that drives it forward. And another example is from the tea sector, also on the topic of living wage. A couple of years ago, we looked into, again, the wage gaps on tea estates across the world. And one of the countries where the gaps were largest was in Malawi. And we then thought, okay, what can we do collectively as a sector to lift the wages in Malawi? And also there, again, you know, if one producer would up his or her wages, he would be maybe, you know, struggling in the global market. But secondly, have at least some conflict with his neighbors, because all the good laborers would of course move to the plantation next door that pays a little bit better. So to prevent also social conflict and to have a competitive bid in the market, we again formed a collective agreement basically between the private sector. We will all move forward. Of course, all anti-competition law or all the competition laws were, you know, adhered to. Don't worry about that. So if you get that argument, right, you can't do this collectively because of competition law, you actually can, right? So, and if you have questions, come to my team, they will know how to do this. But we didn't only have the private sector in, right? We also brought in the government and everyone else. So we really established across Malawi in the entire tea sector an agreement on how can we progress these wages. And no, we haven't closed the living wage gaps in Malawi in tea, but we've made enormous strides and beyond actually the boldest dreams of most of those. So I think my message is dare to challenge the status quo, dare to challenge, you know, what we think is impossible, because if we do this collectively, we can do a whole lot more than we thought before.
Yeah. If we refer to the opening speech by the president of UNCA, she said one thing: trust. She said the world has money. There are governments who want to talk to each other, but unfortunately there is the element of trust, and this is what we need to build on today. We need to develop that trust. As employers, I think everybody tends to forget we're human beings as well as employers. We're not something that came from an alien planet somewhere and trying to do different things. We are human beings ourselves. And many times people don't ask, how are you as an employer? It's all about what the employer can do and what the employer can give. But as human beings, we're mothers, we're sisters, we're single moms, you know, we're daughters, and we need to have a life as well. And so it should be a win-win situation. And this is where we need to build the trust. We need to build the trust between all constituents to ensure that we work together. When we talk about development, digital development, we're not thinking of just eradicating the jobs and having robotics and technology take over. In fact, we want to enhance productivity by using technology and systems, but also give opportunity to our team to flourish and go higher and get developed into new opportunities. And this is the only chance that they have to do that, because you don't want one person to continue to do everything for the rest of their lives. When you take over, bring technology to do certain specific tedious jobs, you give an opportunity to that person to develop into something bigger and better, have time to do training, development, on-job skills, off-job skills, all these areas. So there is so much potential by bringing in technology and development, and not just enhancing productivity of the job, but parallel to that, enhancing the productivity of the employee. And it goes hand in hand by default. There, I know that the WEF report a few years back clearly said that there will be about 12 billion jobs that will be lost. But I think, yes, we need to put our hands together, private sector, public sector, all the civil services, to see what we can do about this 12 billion. What are the alternative opportunities? And we should start yesterday, not even today. But to me, there is opportunity. And when we talk about productivity, you can never have productivity without enhancing the team. Because if you expect the team to increase their productivity, means I need to skill them more. I need to give them the right development. I need to have a career plan for them. So it goes hand in hand by default. Many times when we talk about productivity as employers, everybody shies away from us. Your objective is to just work people, to death and take advantage of it. In fact, that is not the case. The case is to develop, the team and ensure that we reach as a business entity to productivity. But public partnerships, PPP, is the solution today. We cannot expect governments to compete with the private sector, because that's not going to be a win-win situation. Here, you're creating unethical competition, and you're burdening the economy in terms of spending on areas where the private sector can contribute. But the private sector, I do agree, also needs to be realistic in terms of the returns that they're expecting, and I see all the organizations today have corporate social responsibilities. What does that tell us? And the budgets that they're putting is humongous. I had an online meeting with one of the biggest F&B organizations a few months back, and they were talking to me about an annual budget of $500 million for corporate social responsibility. And I'm like, what? They said, yes, that's our responsibility. We have to create programs. We have to develop. We have to give back. We have to sustain the farmers in different countries. We need to ensure that they're well taken care of, the education system, the healthcare system. So the mindset has changed. Many employers, they're looking today how to give back to the community, how to add value to the company. This is where social development is happening, and creatively adding value. But we need to trust each other. We need to understand that, yes, the private sector doesn't have hidden agendas. They have to make profit. They have to make money. Otherwise, they will not be sustainable. Otherwise, they will be going out of business. But today, they are also giving a big percentage of these profits back to the community. And this is where the trust has to be developed to make sure that we are on the right track, all of us. Thank you.
For us here in Qatar, we are looking more at, of course, AI is a challenge for all companies, all countries. It's taking away a lot of jobs already, and more to come. So we have to be very creative in how to sustain jobs and to make it more meaningful, and not just have a fake number of employment. It's like Sonia said. It's about how you make them more productive rather than just numbers. even if you can afford it, okay, you should not have somebody who's not productive in the company, because it's a whole culture, and then it can really spoil the whole atmosphere. So in Qatar, we're looking more, and the country is doing so much on the creative industry part, where the human element is still very important in the creativity part. Okay, now some people can claim that AI is sometimes more creative than humans, but we can argue this. But really, creativity and creative industries is the next focus for us. And technology, I don't know if you guys know, but Qatar is hosting for the third time in February the Web Summit, and it's going to be here for some time. We have a long agreement. The Web Summit is for startups in technology in general. And this year in November, end of November this month, we have the Mobile Congress, which is a huge event. Normally it happens in Barcelona, but we're going to have it in Qatar. That's to create an ecosystem of startups and the technology companies. A lot of them are now moving to Qatar as a regional headquarter for the bigger companies, and then an incubator for startups in the region, which also is very, very helpful, because a lot of people in our region I want to say MENA region, has restrictions and moving around. Some of it is cultural. Some of it, for example, women in some countries are more difficult for them to leave home because of cultural issues, and they say, okay, we want to protect them. So you can work them from distance, working from home. So that's something that we're training our people to get used to. Some areas like Gaza, for example, where people cannot leave home and they cannot leave their space. We also employ a lot of people there. Hopefully, when the infrastructure is back in terms of internet and all this, so we will continue to do that and continue empowering these pockets of politically oppressed or culturally immaturity in some areas, that we can help those to also empower them. In our company, we try to also follow that by, for example, making sure that we have a great diversity in terms of we have 57 nationalities in our company, and they're all, hopefully, I feel that they all feel equal. Okay, we are very strict about any racism or discrimination in our company. We have more than 1/3 of our employees are women, and that's also reflected in the higher management. So it's not only salespeople in the stores, or no, also management should be also. And our target is to have a 50-50 balance. Hopefully, one day in the next 3-4 years, we'll reach that. So it's about private sector. In a smaller countries like Qatar can also lead the change, and if all of us put our efforts on trying to achieve some goals, I think only by enhancing their ability to manage their people, we can actually achieve all the goals of the government without the interference of government. But of course, it's more challenging for bigger countries.
Thank you so much. And I think whether we like it or not, the new normal is trying to work together with AI actually to advance all of our goals. As mentioned earlier, we're all the same team. We don't want to leave anyone behind. But then, yeah, I know AI is coming for my job with AI presenters nowadays. Not to go back to the same cheeky note, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm very glad that for the quality control of chocolate as well, that I hope that AI never gets to be able to taste the quality of the chocolate, by the way. So, so that one we know that's safe for the taste testers. For our last question, I wanted to go back to Dan and talk about business leadership now. How can business leadership ensure that efforts to drive this social development lead to tangible and meaningful improvements, I think, in people's lives and contribute to long-term social cohesion and sustainability?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think we got a hint that we need to go a bit faster. So I'll give an example from our work on the African continent, and especially again from a food system perspective. There's a lot of fast-moving consumer goods companies, that have a global footprint that also have a presence on the African continent. And most of their factories at the moment import the raw material from outside of the continent, process it on the continent, and then provide to the consumers and a huge growing populations. Now we have engaged with the leadership of those companies, and we said, yeah, I mean, this doesn't make a lot of sense, right? It's costing a lot of foreign exchange, and there's no incentives in the countries where those companies are to create more jobs, to create more prosperity beyond the jobs that are in those factories. For example, in South Africa, we've set targets with the companies that by 2030, 80% of the sourcing needs to come from the region, where it now is 20%. And from that, huge incentives are now being pushed into the market, right? SMEs are being trained to meet the specs of these companies. And the SMEs are then reaching out to the smallholder farmers that supply them so that they meet the specs. And normally, it's also the case with this leadership that if you meet the requirements of a fast-moving consumer goods company, you can basically supply to the entire world. So it's not that you're tied into that one company then, but actually by this trade link, this market link, the world opens up, and that smallholder farmer, that SME, then can all of a sudden supply basically to the world, grow their income. And in all of these efforts, and particularly also in Ghana and Nigeria, we said that if we take this target of more regional and domestic sourcing, then 80% of those companies need to be female-led, and also the farmers need to be really women farmers. So again, setting super high targets, in the first perspective, and some even thinking, okay, can we do this? So to your target, right? But then if you really show that leadership and you don't relent, and every time you hear can't be done, you say must be done, then it really starts to work. And I think it's also through that leadership that you then start driving a much larger impact, right? Which is for the workers, which is for the farmers, which is in the end indeed creating opportunities to upskill, to have different jobs. And I think that is so important in this entire transition. And I think the final point is also by doing this, for example, farming at the moment is a profession, by default and not by choice. And I think we need to turn agriculture into a sector that is, a sector that you join by choice, which is a profession that is giving you prosperous lives, and not just, you can just stay to survive. And I think, again, that is starting with that business leadership, providing the right incentives. And if every time you hear no, you say yes.
I'm going back to dare to challenge the status. I just wanted to see if we have enough time just to give final words for our two speakers, Sonia and Ashraf. Just a rough 30-second wrap up of your thoughts on this panel.
If I'm going to answer the same point that Dan referred to, then we're talking about competitive collaboration. We're in a world where it's becoming smaller and smaller, it's shrinking. We need to work together as even competitors because we can actually add value to each other and support each other. This is something the private sector unfortunately fails in because everybody wants to eat the cake and keep the cake to themselves. When in fact, when we share it, we can always support each other and build each other higher and create more social impact globally. This is an issue that we need to look at. Funding is very important to support the private sector to ensure that it can upscale. And when the private sector upscales means better job opportunities and better social attributes, but at the same time, collaboration between all constituents is the most important thing. Thank you.
Just final notes, maybe in 30 seconds, like you said. We have to, AI is a fact, we have to embrace it, not fight it. I like to work a lot with the young, starting from college students and all these things. Please listen to them, they're amazing. They're very productive, very smart, smarter than you think. And just you know, I encourage everyone to look at the Qatari system and law, labor law, and how it's implemented, and talk to people in the private sector. There's a lot of lessons to learn, like we can learn from others also. But the maturity we reach today, I feel, of course, never enough, but it's satisfying enough for us as a private sector.
Thank you. And on that note, thank you so much to Ashraf, Sonia, Dan, for your thoughts and your expertise in sharing with us today. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Leila. Thank you very much. Actually, between the bananas, the chocolate, the cake, and the AI, I think there were many messages. Yeah, many messages, but at the end, we're talking about recognizing potential, about trust between employers, employees, trust in the system, trust in the policy making, in the private sector. It's all comes together. And this is really what gives us all food for thought, I think, today. I would like to introduce now Her Excellency Ms. Valerie Berset-Bersher, State Secretary at the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor to share this private sector forum with you, and I'll be shorter than foreseen because I have to jump into a next event. So excuse me for that. When we talk about social development, social justice, or decent work, the conversation can sometimes sound abstract, like a moral ideal that is hard to measure in the real world. So for that reason, if we speak about creating enabling environments for business to advance social development, I would like to take you into a garment factory in Asia. A few years ago, this factory was struggling. Long hours, high staff turnover, tired workers, and production that kept falling behind. The management saw good working conditions as a cost, not as an investment. Then something changed. The factory joined the Better Work program, a partnership between the ILO and the IFC, which Switzerland is a long-time supporter. It helps companies to improve labor standards while staying competitive. They began with very simple things: improving air circulation, ensuring fair pay, creating space for open talks between workers and supervisors. Nothing dramatic, just respect, dialogue, and small step towards safer and fairer conditions. Then something remarkable happened. Productivity rose by more than 20%. Fewer people left their jobs. Orders from international buyers increased. Because customers began to trust the factory's social standards, workers became more motivated, more skilled, and proud of their work. And I think this is coming back to what Sonia just mentioned before. What started as compliance exercise turned into a virtuous cycle: better labor conditions and better business. That factory was not alone. The same happened in other different countries. It's a powerful reminder that decent work is not a cost. It's a catalyst. When people are treated with dignity, with trust, it replaces tension. Everyone wins: workers, employers, and economies. Too often, companies and even governments focus on short-term savings instead of the long-term gains that come from improving productivity. Higher productivity is the real engine of progress. It will allow wages to rise, living standards to improve, and businesses to stay competitive. Switzerland is convinced that creating an enabling environment for steady productivity growth is key to long-term success for companies and for societies. Productivity and decent work are not opposites, they are partners. Higher productivity allows for better pay and conditions. Better jobs make work more productive. Of course, this balance is not automatic. In many countries, we have seen wages growing more slowly than productivity over the last 2 decades. Technology and globalization have changed the way we work, but not always the way we share the benefits. There is where public policy now plays a vital role. One important tool in Switzerland is the skills development. To make sure that workers can adapt and that the benefits of progress are shared more fairly. In Switzerland, our dual vocational education system is a good example. Young people spend time both in school and in real workplaces. This helps companies to train the talent they need and help young people to build careers with real prospects. The result? We have one of the lowest youth unemployment rates in Europe and a workforce that is skilled, adaptable, flexible, and innovative. This is especially true for small and medium-sized enterprises, and I'm coming back to Sonia's intervention. SMEs around the world provide most jobs. Many SMEs face barriers to grow productivity, such as limited access to finance, new technologies, or management skills. That is why my country supports policies to help SMEs succeed, not by lowering standards, but by encouraging innovation, training, and fair competition. We believe in a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. Through our international cooperation, we also help partner countries to address the root causes of low productivity and poor working conditions. This approach helps to reduce informality, strengthen local ownership, and build lasting capacity among national actors. So to every business here, business leader and also government representative, I would like to say, invest in people is a smart business. And that is what creating an enabling environment for business to advance social development really means. Not balancing profit against purpose, but discovering that the two grow stronger together. Thank you for your attention.
Very much for your thoughtful remarks and sharing with us this example from Switzerland. It's truly been enlightening and inspiring. Thank you. Our next panel discussion focuses on building skills, promoting lifelong learning, and creating decent jobs. Policies for inclusive development. I'm pleased now to invite our moderator, Ms. Anamika Chatterjee from Khalij Times, and our panelists to take their seats on the stage. Mr. Arne Frank, Managing Director of EU International and Economic Affairs, BDA, Confederation of German Employers Association. Also, Ms. Marwa Hamad, Global Gender Strategy Manager, Youth Education and Entrepreneurship, Schneider Electric, and Mr. Azim Muhyiddin, Partner and Fragment, and Ms. Nicole Fiona Stewart, Director of Organizational, Cultural and Inclusion from Dubai Holding Entertainment. Thank you so much, and I wish you a very thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel. The earlier panel spoke at length about how private sector can define social development. This panel takes the conversation a step further, which means that what does it mean in practice? And that how can we equip our workforce for the future? Technological shifts, green transition, and demographic changes are basically ensuring that the skills needed in the workforce are changing. And private sector's efforts in workforce development will basically ensure how inclusive this transformation is. So I have with me some distinguished panelists who are working across sectors in this space and doing some remarkable work there. So a big round of applause for all of them. I want to start with Ani. It always helps when countries have infrastructures in place that align learning with, the needs of the labor market. Germany's dual vocational training has been lauded as a great exemplary model. How can other countries adapt from that model?
Thank you for the invitation and your question. Yeah, so it's never about copy pasting. Huh? Every state has to find its own balance. We already spoke about cultural differences, about company cultures, but I think there are some human principles which apply everywhere in the world. Let me probably start with the problem description. I think there are 3 dimensions. Sometimes companies are afraid, if I do proper apprenticeship systems, it will steal my time. It will lower my productivity because an employee who has a job has to invest time for apprentices. Then, second problem, some companies feel left alone. So what is a curricula? What do I need to teach my apprentices? And the third problem is the individual dimension of the apprentices. Because in the very beginning, they may earn less money. They have to invest time, and for a certain period of time, they are probably at the end of the food chain of a company. And when talking about vocational training, I think we have to address these all 3 dimensions. And it needs a bit of cultural change to address these 3 dimensions. And as you said, in Germany and in many other European countries, we found a way to do this cultural shift. And I think the overarching principle is employability. So when we do a curricula for vocational training, we want to make sure that an apprentice profits from it and the companies profit from it. And deriving from this overall principle, I think there are certain criteria you have to follow. So it has to be a bottom-up approach. So in Germany, the companies say which curricula they need. And the companies define what they want. It's not a top-down process by law or by other authorities. And it's a very collaborative process. So there are certain horizontal things you have to follow, but in the end, it's chambers of commerce, the individual companies, social partners who steer the whole process. Second characteristic is it's not stable. So the problem when you define it by law is that it takes years, sometimes decades, to reform a certain curricula. The curricula in many states where the vocational training system works quite well is super flexible. It's agile. We are used to it to change curricula within months. This is the second principle. And then why is it called dual vocational training? I think that's an important thing to explain. And this explained or is to solve this second problem description I made, that some companies feel left alone. It's called dual vocational training because 70% is taking place in a real work environment, but 30% is at a vocational training school. And these training schools exist everywhere in the country, and there are certain training schools for every sector. So it's not general education in the sense like in a primary school, but it's a very specific education tailored at the vocational training you want to address. And I think, as I said, it's a human principle to nudge everybody, companies and apprentices with to solve these three problems I described in the end. When you follow these characteristics, I think it works quite well everywhere in the world.
Marwa, bringing you into the conversation, women in many parts of the world face barriers to facing those upskilling opportunities. In your experience, what strategies have really worked in providing them with those opportunities?
Yeah, thank you so much, Anamika. Thank you, Arnie. And reflecting on the bottom-up approach that he tackled, when I joined Schneider, I had one mission, which is to elaborate or create a gender strategy for the foundation activities. So the challenge that I had, that the table was not designed for women. So I'm not answering the question on who sits on the table or if we should have a quota for girls in our training programs. The question or the challenge was on how to create the table itself, how to create the infrastructure, how to build the system, or to rebuild it again to include women. So if we speak numbers, the energy transition is like expected to generate over 40 million new jobs by 2050, according to the IRENA. And statistically speaking, actually men cannot fulfill this gap. We have a skills gap, we have jobs created, and men cannot fulfill it. So it's a need for the corporate. And again, reflecting on the women positioning, we would see that many women, or we can mention one of the UN data that 3 out of 4 women are out of education, employment, or training. So reflecting on the bottom up and how to create a supportive ecosystem for girls where we include governments, private sector, civil society organizations, we would need to follow a multi-stakeholders approach. When I create a training center, for example, or try to access community, I cannot come there and say, okay, I have my curriculums, I will just implement this training center. I would need to work with community NGOs. I would need to reflect on the stereotypes, the social norms, on how to create this training center. And afterwards, even if we see the current training centers, you would notice that the infrastructure is lacking. The height of the equipment is not relevant for women, for the average women height. You would see as well that the curriculums are not gender responsive. And afterwards, the accessibility to factories for women to access employment is non-existent as well. So again, reflecting on the multi-stakeholders approach and how we built the strategy with the inclusion of all partners on the table to create it for women. That's why Schneider Electric and its foundation created the program of youth education and entrepreneurship. And this program was aimed to empower 1 million youth in energy management by the end of this year. And we achieved this number 2 quarters ahead. Now we have over 1 million youth empowered in energy management, green innovation, and entrepreneurship. So that's why I'm reflecting that strategy alone is not enough. We need to have a localized action. We need to have tailored solution, and we need to have women with focus groups and discussions so they tailor the responses with us. One example that I can add on Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, one of the largest refugees camp, because the main element of our program that we access remote areas and underserved communities. So in this refugees camp, we implemented a project in collaboration with Électriciens Sans Frontières and UNHCR. And Schneider's role was actually to link industry with the skills gap and afterwards with the employment. So we're bringing to the table the training that women and youth would require in order to excel, to have access to income, and so on. So we had many trainings on e-waste, on solar implementations, and so on. And eventually, what we've noticed that when we create opportunities that are relevant to realities, and then with the governments and the civil society, we were able to provide them with entrepreneurial skills so they can excel afterwards. So this was one of the examples that I really wanted to mention because Schneider or in general, private sector rules come where the intervention could be complicated. When we have low resources, when we have low accessibility in remote areas, so this is where we come and we make this impact. And finally, I wanted to recap with 3 main elements. First thing is inclusion by design. So how we measure our success, how do we say that this training program was successful? We actually started to move from quantitative, from saying 1 million youth, and these youth received a minimum of 120 hours of training. So now we are moving to qualitative. Now we are measuring how these women became resilient, and resilient in 2 main aspects. The first one is economic resilience, for sure. They have income generating activities. Now they are managing their households. And secondly, the resilience to crises. We need to speak about self-esteem. I really do wonder if in this, in this room, none of the women had imposter syndrome. And actually women in vocational education, they also face it. So now we are measuring the self-confidence. So after you finish the training, how do you feel about your self-confidence? How do you feel that you have more autonomy over your life decisions? So the first thing is self-confidence is not a luxury. And it's not only for employees in corporates, it's also for the beneficiaries in our programs. And secondly, it's resilience to crises when it comes to climate crises. Because, for example, in Cox's Bazar, they are coming from forcibly displaced background. So this is why we really see the resilience. If it happened again, how would they react to this? So this measurement is very important. And secondly, for the innovation or in the investment in capacity, where we actually invest in the capacity, but not only by training centers, but the ecosystem and the infrastructure. And lastly, I'm reflecting on Sonia's speech as well, like how we collaborate in the collaboration over competitiveness, because this was the first question that I asked when I joined private sector. So a social impact is a competitive advantage, or we actually lead by example. And by leading by example, I want to share with all of you that our module for Schneider Electric Youth Empowerment Programs got the Gold Award for the Emirates Energy Awards by the Ministry of Energy, and now it's getting replicated in multiple countries. Thank you.
Azim, migration is increasingly shaping labor market strategies worldwide. How can these policies better connect international mobility with national skill strategies?
Great, thank you very much. Hi everyone, good morning. Great to be with you, and especially a warm welcome for those who are first time entering Qatar and visiting this wonderful country that I'm very proud to call my home. I think it's a great question. I think maybe it would help if I just contextualize this a little bit further, which will then help understand some of the recommendations that I would make in this regard. Look, I've been in the field of migration and mobility now for 15 years. I know I don't look that old, but it has been that long. And I really feel that we're on the precipice of quite a big change, particularly in relation to new technologies, the green transition, and also changing demographics. And that's all underpinned by, I think, what is quite a stark reality of our era, which is the movement of people. People are moving borders, not just for new opportunities, but also to fill skills gaps. So what does that mean? That means that there is somewhat of a sweet spot to be found between skills strategies by governments, but also talent mobility. So the ability to fill that shouldn't be looked at in isolation, but looked at in harmony. But to give you some more practical context on the ground, from a private sector perspective, most businesses don't actually look overseas to find talent. They would much prefer to be able to find talent from within their borders. It's more costly, it's more time consuming, it is more cumbersome to be able to find talent from overseas. But the fact that is happening is indicative of the fact that a skill might be lacking within that country. So the baseline to look at this is, if a company is looking overseas for talent, then that is a talent that is coming into the country that could then also help to upskill others within that environment as well. But also with migration, you also have what we call in the industry positive overspill. But that's where there are other benefits. So some really good studies have shown that where a country has at least 10% migration, you also see benefits in increases in imports, increases in exports, and also increases in intellectual property patent registrations, which are all actually creating opportunities for everybody else in that country. So the way I've always viewed migration and migration policy is to be able to help countries really expand and really promote growth from within. But then what does that mean in practice, and what are some of the recommendations? I think there's three in particular to really be able to maximize the potential of talent mobility. I think the first one is really to ensure that any migration system is forward-looking. So looking at what skills will be needed, not just now, but also in the future. So if you look at migration systems today, they can be somewhat reactive. You're looking at the skills that might be needed for a short-term period, but not necessarily looking at what will be needed in the future. So green skills, for example, is a really good example of a skill set that will be required to help countries meet their net zero commitments. But without a dedicated migration pathway to allow people to attract talent holding green skills, then we are not maximizing the benefits of talent mobility. The second area I would say of focus would be to encourage better skills recognition across borders. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but I certainly have. You're in a foreign country, you get in a cab, you're speaking to your cab driver, and it turns out that this person has some wonderful degree from their home country, but is working as a cab driver. And that's not any offense to cab drivers, but I'm just saying that individual has significantly higher skills and is effectively overqualified for the role that he or she is doing. And some studies have shown that that has led to a loss of $40 billion of income because you are having overqualified people working in an industry where they shouldn't be. So the ability to cross-transfer skills and qualifications, I think, is really, really important. And then the third point, which I think is what everyone's kind of touched up on today, is the importance of having a multi-stakeholder approach to the conversation on migration and talent mobility. Here in Qatar, and you know, I've been here for 7 years now, I've noticed a significant improvement and dialogue happening between particularly the Ministry of Labour and the private sector in particular. And what we are seeing is that there are now opportunities to have policies being implemented that actually benefit everybody within the private sector and also the migrant workers that come to this country. Here in Qatar, we're a country of 3 million roughly, of which 2.7 million are migrant workers. So it's really important for us to be able to create the frameworks to be able to access talent, to bring talent, and also retain talent in the country.
Thank you. Yes, that was beautifully articulated. Nicole, what strategies in your experience have helped link labor upskilling with the principles of inclusivity and diversity?
First of all, thank you very much for having me on the panel today, joined by incredible panelists, and thank you very much for attending. Really appreciate it. So for me, it's psychological safety. I think that is unbelievably important when you're marrying upskilling with inclusion. Now, I specifically work in the area of disability inclusion. And for someone who has a disability, it is so important that they feel that they can raise their hand in a workplace and say, I have a disability. And that is a big deal because statistically, they are far more likely to be discriminated against for sharing that information. They're more discriminated against for getting a job in the first place, or if there's promotion opportunities to actually getting that promotion as well. So creating that psychological safety is absolutely fundamental. Disability is a different category from other elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know how many women are in your business. You know how many men are in your business. You know the different nationalities, but you do not know how many people in your business have a disability. So what we do to try to enhance that is focus on our leadership engagement strategy. And I think this has been mentioned in previous panels as well, the importance of leadership advocacy. So for our leaders, it's unbelievably important that they understand what is disability. Disability, of course, is not something that someone experiences when they're sleeping at night. It's something that they experience when they meet that first environmental barrier or attitudinal barrier. That's when they're disabled. So trying to educate our senior leaders from a CEO level is really important. Then this leads on to our CEO and our own company at Dubai Holding Entertainment, spearheading and chairing the steering group for disability inclusion, holding other leaders accountable. Also, our senior leaders advocate this at every turn, from leading our inclusion events like our Roll and Stroll for Inclusion. We have voluntary inclusion pledges for disability that get sent out company-wide. There's a lot of things that they can do that then trickle down and transfer to second level leaders. So you start to see second level leaders advocate and proactively look for ways to accommodate people with disability and their needs, whether that be changing schedule sessions, timings of their work, physical accommodations in the workplace. There's so much that can be done that we have seen in the workplace being adopted by second level leaders proactively that are now, as a result, we're seeing people with disabilities being promoted at a very active and healthy rate within our organization. So, and even in the organization, outside of the organization, it's really important to upskill future talent as well. So we have our Enable Work initiative, and that is looking at people with disabilities who have no experience, which might potentially be because they're being discriminated against, that they have nothing on their CV. So come into our business, we invite them in, we get them to choose whatever asset they would like to work at. We have many different types of businesses. We mobilize them, and then that gives them the skills. Potentially some of them have been employed by us, they get employed by other organizations. So to wrap it up, psychological safety, to enable support, leadership advocacy and accountability, and creating pathways for future talent and underrepresented groups to access the workforce.
Since we are talking about lifelong learning here, and I want to bring you into the conversation again, how are these programs, lifelong learning programs, keeping up with the fast pace at which technology is evolving?
Yeah, indeed. There are so many structural changes. One of the panelists mentioned AI, which transforms the workforce in a speed unseen before. So we represent in Germany 1 million companies with 30 million employees. So there are a lot of examples which surface on our desks. And there are a lot of really interesting examples. I think one very thing I would like to stress is lifelong learning applies to the whole life circle. I think in the political debate, very often the last third of the life circle is mentioned. But if you apply lifelong learning properly in your company, you have to target all age groups, and then you can be sure that you have the proper skills in place. For example, in Europe, because of demographic change, many companies target specifically also the younger age cohorts to have the right skills in place. With early career guidance at school, with internships for 16-year-old boys and girls. I spoke about vocational training. There are dual study programs where you combine university with formation on the job. And then we are at the stage where many companies are a bit struggling, because here individual characteristics step in. So I'm now in my mid 40s, Yeah, here you cannot adapt that quickly to new circumstances. At least that's what psychologists say. And here the companies are struggling the most, as you said, to reskill and upskill everybody. But the things you learn as a company at a very early age target group, you can also apply now, or you have to apply to older age groups. So this resistance of using AI, to stick with this example, the resistance that you cannot stay nowadays in the very first job you were trained for. The probability is nearly 100% that in 10 years, 15 years, also I will probably do a totally different thing at BDA that I do now. So create a very vivid and agile environment when it comes to career paths and when it comes to your very individual tasks. And if you have this this culture and this attitude within your company, I think then you will not have any problems with reskilling and upskilling, be competitive and be productive.
Marwa, we have amazing, each one of you are bringing such rich perspectives to this conversation. It's really amazing. Marwa, how can different stakeholders, businesses, governments, how can they include gender responsiveness in this approach to lifelong learning?
Yeah, thank you, Anamika. So again, the multi-stakeholders approach needs a narrative change. So you need to use the right language with every stakeholder. With government, you need to speak with them about the local capacity building, for example, in the national interest. For companies, you need to speak with them about how to attract and retain talent. And then for NGOs, you would need to actually really explain to them what would be their role, how they would access the community, how would we support the community. So one example of this is the Desk First program. I would take you through a trip to Mali, Senegal, and Niger, where women in rural areas, they don't have access to income, they don't have access to any sort of skilling, and also they don't have any accessibility to the city, the center. So in this program, we have women, and the main idea behind it was to ask them about their needs. So they don't have electricity, training, or any sort of income generation again. So what we did, we have the European Union. This was in collaboration with the European Union. And the main idea was to explain to each partner what the role would be. So first thing, for Schneider, we would need to provide electrification. So we've installed 6 microgrids to provide electrification to this rural area. And secondly, again for Schneider, to link the industry to the skills gap or the poverty in this region, would to be establishing technical centers. So we established 6 technical centers. And it doesn't stop there because, as I mentioned, they don't have access to factories. So how would they generate income? So with Plan International, we had the community access to provide them with financial literacy courses, business management courses, and then microcredit loans. So they start establishing their own businesses. So now women are trained on installments of solar panels, but it doesn't stop there. Now they own and they operate their own businesses with income generation. So this was one of the examples where we mention or where we showcase how we can have different partners. And for the government's role in this case was for sure the connection with the European Union, but also quality assurance with the academia, following up on the curriculums that was established by Schneider. So just to recap on this point, the 3 main elements was first the curriculums on how to create gender responsive curriculums, linking industries to social impact, and then mentorship, because as I mentioned, self-confidence is really important for us for the resilience. So we connected leaders from Schneider, female and male leaders, to women from underserved communities to provide them with mentorship, role models, exposure. So now they can see another woman who's a successful engineer, who's a mother and a wife, and she made it, and they are also able to make this as well themselves. And finally, when we showcase it to the last stakeholders, who are in this case the participants, the women, when we discuss it with them, we would need to show them how this would be sustainable, how they would access employment or entrepreneurship or even further lifelong learning. Thank you.
Azim, what frameworks are needed to ensure that talent mobility contributes to inclusive development?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing it back to migration, where I feel more comfortable. So your first question was, how do we link national skill strategies to talent mobility? But now, to take it the next step further, we have to think about how can talent mobility be more equitable, where everybody benefits. The country, the company, the migrant worker, everybody should be able to benefit from migration in some shape or form. So I think I've already mentioned that I strongly believe that talent mobility should be viewed as an engine for growth. But without the right frameworks in place, then that's where the potential for abuse can happen. There's a myriad of different recommendations and perspectives on this, but I think there's three in particular that I would highlight. I think the first one is that every single migration framework should have fair recruitment embedded within the system. No migrant worker should ever have to pay exorbitant fees to move borders, for example. Every migrant should have the right to decent work and a safe environment to work. This is standard expectations. The second area is to enlarge and focus more on different, what we call in the industry, migration pathways, which is a fancy way of saying visa categories, but migration pathways sounds more fancy. Effectively, what migration pathways are is it allows different communities to engage with the country in which they live. So a good example is, if you move to another country, does your spouse have the right to work? In some countries, yes, a spouse of a foreign migrant has the right to work. In others, no. They either have to apply for permission or they just don't have that right. But imagine if every spouse had the right to work in a foreign country. That's also then increasing that family's ability to prosper and operate within that country. So another good example is for students. In many countries, once you finish your graduate studies, in some countries you're able to then stay for a little while longer in what we call a post-study work visa, for example. But that doesn't exist everywhere in the world. And that is a talent source that exists that we should be able to tap into from a private sector perspective. And I like the example that Sonia gave of the dishwasher that then became an executive chef. I mean, that can only happen if the right frameworks are in place to allow migrant workers to change job titles and job descriptions. If you came into the country as a mechanic, that doesn't mean that you should be stuck being a mechanic for the rest of your life. You should be able to become an entrepreneur. You should be able to become, a business development, whatever it is, you should be given the ability to do that. But that can only happen again when there's the right frameworks in place. And the last point I would make is, beyond migration, is the infrastructure in place should also allow migrant workers to participate in every facet of society. So access to healthcare, being able to drive, for example, but also that also extends to employment protections. And the private sector takes this very, very seriously. So ensuring that migrant workers are not discriminated against on the basis of where they come from. Ensuring that migrant workers also have the ability to take maternity leave, for example. So, these are very key, I think, considerations when we talk about making migration more inclusive and giving more people opportunities. And I think this way we start to view mobility beyond just the economic contribution, but actually now we're looking at migration as a contribution to society as a whole.
Before we open questions to the floor, I just want to ask you, how are these modern learning programs that organizations are adopting, how are they leading to more inclusive workplace culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, when you look at modern learning programs, it goes beyond teaching a skill. It is amazing to see so many organizations, and I'm sure many of you have your training programs that are now outside of the classroom. You have them in online portals. And this is really important because that opens up inclusion. And if we strive to meet standards of the WCAG standards, like we're trying to do at Dubai Holding Entertainment, we work on that with our websites and our online platforms, then this allows for example, text to be resized. It allows for your videos to have captions. It allows for screen reading technology to be used. And that again opens up inclusion in learning for people with, you know, again in my space, same with you with mobility, but people with cognitive disabilities, visual disabilities, hearing disabilities. So these online portals are incredible, but even in the classroom, we're also seeing more experiential learning where you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And this is really good for different types of learning. And additionally to that, micro-learning, little small bite-size lessons that people can use. How many times have we had, you know, something that we have to get through a learning program, and if we could, we would just let it run in the background because there's so much content to go through. So actually, if you've got this micro-learning, smaller bite-sized lessons that you can access, you know, freely and when you're available, that also makes a huge difference. So really, it's about marrying technology, clever technology, with well-designed programs to create an inclusive learning environment. And even beyond that, yes, it will create the inclusive learning environment, but more importantly, it sends a message to your employees that says, we've thought about your needs. And that's what helps to create an inclusive culture.
Thank you. Let's now open the floor for questions. Firstly, I'd like to invite Mr. Ferdinando Regalia, Manager of the Social Sector Department at the Inter-American Development Bank. Sir, are you here?
No, thank you very much and for the invitation and a great, inspiring, insightful conversation from the panelists. I give you a little bit of the perspective from Latin America and the Caribbean. The IDB is the largest regional development bank in the region, and we have a portfolio of $4.5 billion invested in skill development system. And I want to share 3 thoughts that were actually inspired also by the conversation. And for the rest of the world, maybe not to follow some of the example of what happened in the Caribbean in Latin America in the last 20 years. So when we ask employers in Latin America and Caribbean, what do they need? They complain about the lack of foundational skills. So literacy and numeracy. So the quality of education is absolutely important beyond the technical vocational education. So that is an area of investment that is absolutely critical. The second area where we are working are actually regulatory environment. We talked today in the initial panel regarding expansion of social protection, universal social protection, what that costs. And for example, for employer in Latin America, non-wage costs are, for each dollar paid in wages, are about 50 cents that are paid in non-wage costs. And there is a huge discussion that's happening regarding how to finance social protection, reducing non-wage costs more from general revenues and less from labor taxes. And that is important because in countries like Mexico, because of these huge non-wage barriers, 90% of the firms have just 1 to 4 employees. And we know the firms need to grow in order to invest in skill development, etc. And the third is underinvestment in technical vocational education and particularly dual education. And here I think Germany and Switzerland, as I provide a lot of joint support, for example, to Mexico to change the law on dual education and to really drive this investment forward. And I'm 58. You are much younger than me, but our region is demographically changing very, very fast. And there is one key element we are not solving. It is learning, continuous learning for actually people 50 and above, because they're going to have to continue to work.
Yeah, indeed. One thing we didn't mention here at the panel, that is basic education. And here I see the governments and the state in responsibility. When we talk about employability and vocational training, it is of course a responsibility of the companies, but the foundation has to be laid by companies and states. And here we have problem in very developed states, and we have problems in less developed states. I always found it very striking that we have the same problems in developed states with marginalized groups which lack basic education. So the conclusion is very clear, that all over the world we have to face this problem, because what we lose in the very first years, it is very difficult to target over a life period. So I think this is very important to stress, the responsibility of governments.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Vafik Nakash, a Government Affairs Director at Microsoft.
Yes, yeah, thank you. My name is Wafiq Nakash, Government Affairs Director at Microsoft. Thank you, panelists, for your insights. Just wanted to reflect on a couple of points as well on this important topic. At Microsoft, our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And in order to realize this mission, we need to ensure that our technology is accessible to people and organizations who need it most. And for that, the skilling part sits at our core strategy in order to enable and ensure that everyone has access to the technology. Also, I would like to mention that AI, it's a hot topic now, and you know it's really taking the world by storm. AI is the next general purpose technology. Just like we saw in steam engine, like electricity and others, we believe that AI will also lead the world in the next revolution, next technology revolution. And so for that, we need to ensure that everyone is able to access AI and ensure that everyone is skilled on AI. We believe in order to realize fully the AI mission and realize the full potential of AI, we have three things that we focus on: the infrastructure, which is of course the data centers that we build, the core frameworks and the fair frameworks that are being developed by regulators and companies, and finally the skilling. And that's why skilling is so center and important for our future. And finally, I would say that in Qatar, for example, we have skilled 50,000 people and professionals since 2020 until now, since we launched our data center. And that's key to our growth in the country. And finally, I would like to invite everyone to check our Microsoft Elevate initiative that we have launched globally, which is really empowering people and organizations to have the skills that they need. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Ms. Dana Al-Dafa, Director of Strategic Partnerships and Business Development at Jussur Manpower Solutions.
Thank you very much, all. So today's topic, building inclusive futures, connects with me personally and professionally. Building an inclusive future is at the core of Qatar's culture and Qatar's national vision. Listening to the morning sessions, it's clear that each of us have a vision, a role to play in creating a more inclusive future, no matter where each one of us sit in the ecosystem. One program I would like to highlight that Jussur Qatar Manpower Solution does is SAHM, which is a platform that connects private NGOs, government, SMEs to part-time workers. The initiative is to support both students, people of determination, as well as housewives to find part-time jobs and opportunities. The aim is to give the participants relevant experience and opportunities that will help them integrate into the Qatari labor market. We launched Sahem 2 years ago, and we've seen some very, very encouraging outcomes. Many students secure full-time roles after their part-time experience, as well as the disabled after the experience that they have had from part-time jobs. They were able to also get full-time roles. These benefits of the program include privileged discounts on public and private transportation, access to approved trainings, housing support, and discounts in privileged banks. In addition to Sahem, we recognize that the private sector organizations can face workforce challenges, including workforce reductions. This led us to create Tadweer, which translates to deployment and reassignment. This program is designed to support companies' employees during restructuring by offering opportunities to reskill and redeploy workers to meet changing demands. I believe Tadweer aligns with Azim's point about ensuring opportunities for all, including expatriate workers. It is also a powerful example of how government and private sector can collaborate to support people, even in difficult times. These examples is a great example of how collaboration between government and private sector can make a real difference, even in challenging times. To end this, I believe every person has a talent waiting to be discovered. They just need the right opportunity to find it. Thank you.
And finally, we'll hear from Ms. Sarah Durrani, founder of Beehive Recycling.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists for your insights, and thank you to the organizers of this forum. As a sustainability business owner, we usually hear about corporations' contributions to upskilling, and they usually have, like Microsoft, larger budgets, policies in place. But for smaller businesses, SMEs in particular, I'd like to hear from the panelists, what pathways do they have to be able to guarantee that their employees have access to upskilling? Specifically in my industry, I see a lot of what you could label as blue collar positions or more vocational on the field positions wanting to transition to white collar, more technical, more administrative. This requires a significant amount of investment. So when it comes to SMEs, how do we tap into global best practices so we can implement these here in Qatar successfully and be part of the ecosystem in terms of our contribution? Thank you.
Thank you. That was an excellent question. So in addition to me being a partner at Fragaman, I'm also the vice chair of the American Chambers of Commerce, despite not being an American, but working for an American company. And one of the things that we seek to do is exactly what you've just said, to create partnerships within the private sector to enable the sharing of best practices. So as an SME, you're absolutely right. Your budget's not going to be as high, and your ability to navigate will be different to a large conglomerate. But that doesn't mean that the messaging and the experiences cannot be shared. In fact, that's what we encourage that to be done. So, I mean, I can't speak for other countries, of course, but just from our experience here in Qatar, and since you're based here, we'd love for you to come and have a conversation with us. And Ziamara, the executive director, is here as well. But it's a good example as to how we can actually partner with large organizations around the world and share best practices with you as well.
Unfortunately, we're running short of time, but our panelists are here. You can please feel free to engage with them. Thank you so much for your excellent insights, and thank you so much for being such an engaged audience. This was really illuminating. Thank you.
Thank you, Anamika. We really enjoyed this discussion. Thanks to all the panelists. you'll get the chance to ask as many questions as you want to whoever is on the panel and whoever is attending here, but during lunch. But before that, we have another panel discussion, and that's entitled Shared Prosperity Through Responsible Business Conduct. And I'd like to welcome my colleague, Folly Thibault from Al Jazeera English. And I invite also our panelists, Ms. Anouk Haylan, Head of Social Sustainability, and Ms. Asma at Unilever, and Ms. Asma Masoud, Director of People and Culture at Abdul Ghani Motors, and Ms. Kristen Ed Green Kaufman, Senior Vice President, United States Council for International Business, and Ms. Nancy Chena, Secretary General of Unicongo. And I wish you a success.
Thank you very much, Leila, for that introduction. And I am so thrilled to have an all-female panel. How often does that happen? To discuss such an important subject. Thank you all very much for being with us. I'm Folie Thibault, and it's a tremendous honor to be moderating this important discussion on shared prosperity through responsible business conduct. As we've heard, we are living through a rapidly changing world, from advances in technology to artificial intelligence, and of course, the realities of climate change and shifting demographics. And in this context, businesses aren't just economic actors, they are key players in shaping fairer, inclusive societies, as well as resilient societies, of course. So our conversation today is about exploring how responsible practices, business practices, can help advance, reduce poverty, advance decent work and social inclusion, while also building trust, innovation, and long-term prosperity. So I'm pleased to welcome our panelists. Let me reintroduce them once again to you. Anouk Haylan, Head of Sustainability at Unilever. Asma Masoud, Director of People and Culture at Abdul Ghani Motors here in Qatar. Kristen Ed-Green Kaufman, Senior Vice President of the United States Council for International Business. And Nancy Chenard, Secretary General of Unicongo, which is l'Union Patronale et Interprofessionnelle du Congo. Thank you all for being here with us. Anouk, let me start with you. Unilever, tell us about what you're doing there, because Unilever is seen as a leader in putting human rights and responsible business at the center of its operations. What sparked that deep commitment within your company, and how are you seeing it make a difference on the ground for workers, for communities, and also suppliers across different markets in the world?
Yeah, thanks so much. So for those who don't know Unilever, we're a global consumer goods company, and we're operating in nearly every country worldwide. We have a turnover of about 60 billion. And with that size comes a responsibility to do, contribute to a better society. So after the UN Guiding Principles were launched in 2011, Unilever has been very focally supportive of that. We were one of the first companies to report on saliency through a standalone human rights report, which we then repeated every year. And we're also leveraging our size and scale to drive meaningful change on issues that matter to us. So, for example, on living wage, women's safety, forced labor, those are issues where we feel they are so important and material to our value chain that we feel that we can drive change. So why we are doing this? Well, obviously, first of all, because it's the right thing to do to keep our people safe, not only in our own operations, but in the wider supply chain, but also because of business resiliency in an evolving regulatory environment. It's very important for Unilever to continue reputation risk, increasing trust with stakeholders. There are so many reasons why this is such a key agenda. And we have some measurable targets as a company. So we report compliance on our responsible partner policy. So we report in our value chain on the amount of suppliers that are compliant with our responsible partner policy. And also we have some measurable targets to drive positive impact. So, for example, we have a target to help 250,000 small farmers improve their livelihoods and 2.5 million small, medium-sized enterprises in the retail side of things to help improve their business success. So that improves obviously it's a sales channel for us. So that improves our business success, but in turn it improves their livelihoods and standard of living.
Right. So a great example of how responsible business conduct isn't just about meeting regulations. It's also about ensuring decent work and respecting human rights and also creating how companies create value. A great example. Thank you for telling us about Unilever there. Asma, let me come to you and talk to you about what you think is the most responsible way companies can conduct business responsibly by fully embedding this in their long-term strategies rather than treating it as a separate corporate social responsibility function. How do they embed it in the long-term strategies?
Thank you, Kholi, for the question. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here representing Al Abdul Ghani Motors, which is one of the largest private companies within the private sector. We have more than 4,500 employees with more than 40 nationalities being on board with us. So to answer your question, Kholi, about how we can make corporate social responsibility at the core of the business rather than a standalone element or a sideshow, it starts from the vision. For example, for us, our vision is to have or to create a happy mobility society. So society is at the core of our vision, which means our acknowledgement and our ownership towards having a thriving society. Society for us begins with our employees and it transcends into our customers, our partners, our vendors, and the larger community that we are within. So by that, when we have defined the vision, Sustainable Development Goals came as one of 6 pillars in our corporate strategy, meaning that we are committed to avail resources, whether that in financial resources, people, or even internal policies to support how we can align with Sustainable Development Goals as well as Qatar's National Vision 2030, all touching upon human elements, economy development elements, and environmental elements. So when we say responsible business conduct, we have to realize that commitment and compliance is required, but it's not sufficient. So you have to comply with laws and regulations, which sets the base for your, let's say, commitment towards social development, but then that's not enough. What you have to do, especially when you are a market leader, is to initiate further efforts and to inspire others to follow. For example, when it comes to laws and regulations within Qatar, we are beyond compliance, especially when it comes to labor laws. For example, we offer extended maternity leaves, we offer paternity leaves, we care about the social and human element of our workers' lives. It's similar when you want to be a good neighborhood, a good corporate citizen means you want to be a good neighbor. But then to be a good neighbor, you have to start with being responsible yourself, to raise a responsible family, and then to contribute to the society. So we understand that being responsible and having a responsible business conduct starts from treating our employees with fairness, not only following laws, but also transcending and giving extra benefits and extra care and respect towards our people. And then the rest will naturally follow. When you take good care of your people, then they can yield sustainable results for the business and the community as a whole. And then our efforts transcend into sponsoring different initiatives at national scale, as well as participating in different forums and like this one to drive the conversation forward and showcase how the private sector can have a real impact on social development.
Thank you very much, Asma, for that. And thank you for sharing that example of extending maternity leave as a way you're engaging in responsible business.
I'm pregnant myself, so this matters a lot to me.
So you made sure that you changed it, right? Well done. Well done. Kristen, let me come to you next. USCIB plays, of course, a leading role in promoting sustainable and responsible business standards through multilateral engagement. What lessons do you think have been learned in advancing responsible business conduct over the past few years? And what further improvements do you think are needed to effectively promote responsible business practices and social progress? Yes, is it on? No, it's not on. Is
that better? Yes. Here we go. First of all, thank you very much to Global Compact, UNDESA, and IOE for hosting this very important event and for recognizing the important role the private sector plays in promoting social development. And congratulations again to Asma on this wonderful news. For those of you who don't know USCIB, we represent over 300 Fortune 500 companies in the multilateral system, including the United Nations. And for decades, US companies have really been leading the way on integrating responsible business conduct into their operations. So RBC is not a new concept for us. And our specific companies have invested millions of dollars in supply chain mapping, human rights due diligence, meaningful stakeholder engagement, grievance mechanisms, and supplier training and education. And all of this work has been rooted in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or the UNGPs as we call them, which really remain the North Star for most of our companies for their RBC practices. To give a recent example of this, USCIB members have invested millions of dollars in leveraging new technologies like AI to strengthen risk identification and due diligence processes. And this really helps us build on lessons learned while continuously evolving to improve our efficiency. Because of AI, one of our members, who is an electronics company, now has better visibility into multiple tiers of their supply chain, from the critical minerals mining to processing and production. But despite these advances, more improvements are needed to continue promoting RBC and social progress. We feel that the next phase really requires an enabling environment for RBC that is practical, realistic, and implementable. It's not possible or effective to expect companies to audit every single supplier or trace every raw material, just like a government would not be able to trace the source of every single product in this room. It just can't be done. So we think that all future and ongoing frameworks have to maintain a risk-based approach and be rooted in the UNGPs. We think that overly expansive requirements risk driving companies to divest or disengage. And this ultimately limits opportunities in parts of the world that need them most. So for example, right now, agricultural crop producers in developing countries are struggling to access the EU markets due to due diligence and technological standards that they're not able to meet. They don't have the capacity to comply with EU rules. And then there's often operational challenges like unclear land tenure or local laws being incompatible. So to succeed, we think RBC policy frameworks have to allow flexibility and prioritize impact over checklists. So today, a lot of our companies throughout the world are overburdened by extensive reporting and disclosure requirements. These require millions of dollars, countless work hours to comply with them. And overly prescriptive or fragmented approaches risk diverting resources away from where they're most needed, especially in promoting more innovation. So in the next phase, businesses would like to see greater emphasis on Pillar 1 of the UNGPs, which is the state duty to protect human rights. And this would be the duty of government to create the enabling conditions for businesses to succeed responsibly. We all know how uncertain this economic environment is, and we really feel that we need to avoid even more regulatory uncertainty and risks that hurt opportunity for people.
Very, very important to highlight that and to highlight the flexibility needed, of course, as globalization keeps evolving and supply chains become more complex, right? I'll come back to that in a minute with you, Kristen. Thank you very much. Nancy, let me come to you next. Unique Congo is representing employers in advancing responsible business practices in Congo and the region. Can you tell us more about what you're doing and from your perspective, what you think are the most promising shifts that you're seeing right now among companies when it comes to integrating social responsibility into everyday business practices?
Thank you very much. I will first start by saying thanks to the organizers to give me the opportunity to give the point of view of not only the Congo, but many of the developing countries. In Unicongo, actually, we believe that responsible business conduct cannot just be a compliance. And this, it has to be in every company DNA. And this also because of our context. In our context, an employer, a company, he's for sure at least one in a week the supplier of someone of his family, someone of his someone of his knowledge. He's the one who buy medicine. He's the one who help him to do something important. He's the one who invests to his project, because employers are seen as the one who get money. So many people go to them when they need help. So for sure, employers are already doing more than what just an employer should do. But still, with the government, what we can do is, for example, I can give an example of Unicongo. With the government, we are pushing for local content law. Actually, we are writing it right now. And the idea is that we want that a law recognize that it's important to make everybody benefit from the prosperity we are creating, not only the big companies. And in developing countries, there is also this specificity that makes the problem even trickier, is that more often the big companies are foreign companies. So there is a perception that there is wealth creating in a country, but
it's not coming.
Yeah, it's not coming to the people.
Right.
And the country doesn't benefit from this wealth. So it's even more important to make it share.
Right.
And
many, sorry to, very interesting what you're saying. And I want to pick up on that because you talk about the big companies, but also many of the small and medium-sized companies on the African continent face real challenges in balancing responsible practices with competitiveness. So how do you see Unicongo, for example, helping these companies seeing this as an opportunity, seeing responsible business practices as an opportunity rather than seeing it as an added cost for them because they're already facing so many other challenges?
No, actually right now we all communication we have about responsible business conduct, companies start to see it as an opportunity because they know that.
How are you selling it? How are you selling it?
For example, we having responsible business conduct help them access to financing. This is very much important because if you want to make a company successful, you have to give them access to knowledge, to finance, and to market. And these three, having responsible business conduct, help them. Knowledge, I will let them know, but access to finance. Now, some bank, before giving you access to finance, they ask you to show what you are doing for the country. Which business conduct do you have? And also, some other biggest company, when they are looking for a supplier, they are also asking them. So in our environment where everybody has to give a part of his person to help someone else, is not that difficult. We say, okay, you can do that. And it's not that costly. And you can benefit a lot from that because you will have access to finance, you will have access to market, and this will help you grow. And by helping you grow, you see that you also did something important because you also help your workers, you also help your community, you also help finally your people. So finally, sometimes I'm selling something, but I'm noticing that it was already done in the smaller scale.
Informal.
Yes, in a formal way, in a smaller scale. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for sharing that example for us and telling us about what you're doing with Unicongo. If I can come back to you, Anouk, and pick up on what Nancy was saying and the challenges that the small and medium enterprises face on the African continent in implementing these responsible business conducts, because, you know, for them, they may not see it as something profit, and also that perception that the big companies like Unilever, for example, are coming in and not necessarily helping the people on the ground. How do you respond to that?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think Nancy put this in a very good way, that ultimately it benefits them as well if they embrace this agenda. So that's mainly how we position it, but from a global company perspective, in terms of, as I said before on the example with also the small and medium-sized enterprises in our value chain, if they have access to improved skills, finance, digital is super important, then it helps them in terms of improved business success. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, now and let's rethink about this in the context of the Doha political declaration, which was adopted here in Qatar. In this context, when we rethink about business in that context, how then can companies ensure that responsible business conduct becomes not just compliance driven, as we've been talking about, but genuine drivers for shared responsibility? What is one recommendation you would make to companies to achieve this?
So first of all, make sure that the human rights agenda is the foundation of your business, and then look at what your company is really good at to drive improved social impact. That's what I would say. And in terms of the Doha Declaration, I think it's very important that governments stand up as well, because we need that. We need a level playing field to drive this agenda forward. And I think there are globally some trends that are negatively impacting this agenda. So, for example, improved inequality, climate change, biodiversity, geopolitical risk, they all have a negative impact, I think, at the moment in the state of human rights. But we actually need, but I think in terms of the evolved legislation, companies should make sure that they hold governments accountable to implement this in their policies.
So, on that, I mean, what kind of enabling environments do you think are necessary for this, and the policy frameworks also? Because each country, of course, has different policy frameworks. It's not something that's uniform, right? So what are the most effective ways then in enabling this environment, you think?
So I think treaties like, or declarations like the
Doha Political Declaration
are key to make sure that we have a global guideline and direction on this. And then it's on governments themselves to make sure that they actually take that back and localize these policies in their own country context. So take, for example, the living wage agenda. Only 15% of governments have minimum wages at the living wage level. So that means that if you would ultimately have 100% of countries implementing living wage requirements and make sure that it's a legal requirement to pay a living wage to workers, then our job is done. And we can make sure that we advance the agenda. But if at the moment, it's Unilever with a handful of other companies really, really advocating for this agenda. I believe it's only 4% of global multinationals who have a commitment at this stage. And I think it puts us at competitive disadvantage. And in all honesty, I'm having some critical conversations with my leadership on us continuing doing so, because it puts us at competitive risk. So if you actually have governments implementing these policies and making sure that they take the steps, and I also understand this is not done overnight, right? So you need to start reviewing, in this case, wage policies, and then ultimately it will benefit everyone.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that. Thank you. Asma, let me come to you next and ask you how we move forward, from this Doha political declarations, and how do you think private sector companies like yours can really use their scale and partnership to move the needle on social progress?
Thank you. So I would like to start with touching upon the partnership between the private and the government sector towards advancing the conversation. In my opinion, it starts with having a seat at the table for the private sector when it comes to shaping the new laws and regulations, especially those touching upon labor laws as well as the specific sector that you operate within. So when the private sector has a seat at the table and they can openly discuss their concerns as well as what matters to them to remain as a sustainable business that can still provide decent and stable jobs for people to work within, then it is important that they can relate with the government about priorities and about what needs to be done in terms of advancing the laws and regulations within the sector. So this is one point of view. Another thing that can be considered is to create more of a systematic framework to drive the efforts at. So it's no longer only an initiative or only a compliance driven, but where you can have a framework, for example, to score how each company is participating to social development, whether in human elements or economy elements or environmental elements. For example, if you come up with a framework where you are scoring and you are able to talk about your initiatives and showcase how it is actually leaving an impact, and then that would translate into motivators for the businesses also. For example, you have priority to talents. Qatar, we are expat-driven market, more than 3 million people, and 75% from them are expats. So the war for talent for us is real. And then if you can showcase that you are able to leave very good social impact, you are taking good care of your people, and then that translates into a scoring mechanism where you can showcase you have priority to talents and you have priority even to deals, to tenders, then this can drive real impact. Businesses would have a stake in it. It's no longer an initiative or about doing this because it's the right thing, but sometimes the frameworks do help put things in a different perspective or take it to the next level.
Okay, thank you so much, Asma, for that. Kristen, your thoughts. What do you see as the practical ways or partnerships that can help make sure that responsible business conduct strengthens both competitiveness and inclusion, especially for small and medium enterprises that we were discussing earlier?
So first, touching on what you previously asked about, it's wonderful that the large responsible business practices are an important part and very important for all companies to follow. And it's great that Unilever and the largest multinationals can afford all of the reporting and disclosure requirements. But I think we need to be very careful and make sure that we're not regulating to a point where it becomes a barrier to entry for many small and mid-sized businesses. There can be unintended consequences here. So we do need these policies in practice, but we need to make sure they're not a barrier to entry for smaller innovators, especially in areas and regions like MENA or Africa, as you said. Our businesses really feel that the most successful models for shared prosperity are those that combine open markets with strong enabling public policies that address informality, that promote education, skills training, digital access, and health. So we already know that open trade has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, but it works best when governments invest in people and tackle the root causes, weak institutions, informality, etc. And when you have these strong institutional foundations, especially the rule of law, businesses can do what they do best, which is hire, innovate, drive economic growth, instead of, as I just said, spending millions of dollars on compliance efforts that try to fix systemic issues that are better addressed through sound public policy. There's some things that private sector alone can't fix. So to be clear, we do feel that businesses have a role to play, and that's why we support collaborative frameworks like public-private partnerships, especially in education, technological access, workforce skilling, which is key to driving economic growth, especially for disadvantaged communities. But these initiatives can never replace robust, sound public policies that address the root causes or institutional weaknesses, especially the lack of rule of law. So the business community, we still remain, especially the American business community, ready to collaborate, but we really need strong public institutions and foundations in order to continue to thrive.
Thank you very much for that. Nancy, if I can come to you and perhaps pick up on what Kristen said there earlier. What do you think about that? Kristen said that we need to be careful that the regulation doesn't negatively impact the small and medium enterprises, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa. Do you agree with that?
Yes, totally agree with that. And right now, I think that many government are taking it into consideration, knowing that more of the companies are SME or even smaller business. Yes, for example, my country, we had to do with oil and gas first because it was the one only sector that was driving the economy. But now we know that we have to do more. Now we know that wealth have to be shared. So many governments are trying to do that now, not to leave nobody behind. And the example of Congo, even if it's not as many countries, you have what says the paper and what's
the actual reality.
Yeah, the actual reality. And the reality is sure that SMEs still need to be trained, need to be helped, need to be accompanied by the government or by other constituents.
And so precisely on that, how do you see the partnerships between international organizations, the private sector, governments? How do you see that helping create the right conditions for sustainable and growth for these companies, not just the big ones, but the small ones as well?
Yeah. Actually, the partnership is working.
Is it?
Yeah, it's working. In Congo, it's working because we are taking good example from what is done in some other country. But what is important is to be grounded and to take into the consideration our local particularity, because each country has one. So it's important to have, of course, international partner, but also people from the country that know how it works, that know if this measure or that one can help. And I have to admit that as for us, our government is when he doesn't have to pay for something, he's happy with that, and he's government, and he let finally societies and companies and workers work with the different constituents and partner to be able to organize something so all the country can benefit for the wealth.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, ladies, for your thought-provoking insights. Really great to hear your different experiences in different regions, as we've heard, but also sectors. Thank you very much. Now, we're not quite done yet because we're going to take some reflections from the floor, just to broaden out the conversation and the perspectives. We're going to hear from a few voices from the floor. If I can call on Mr. Gerbrand Haverkamp first, Executive Director of the World Benchmarking Alliance. Is he with us?
He's with you, and he's very sorry to be the first man to break this female panel. So apologies.
Sorry, I couldn't see you there.
Apologies for that. Maybe to build on Anouk. So I get a feeling today that sometimes the word private sector might be the most unhelpful term that we have because of its diversity. So I've been quoting the uncle of Spider-Man for some years now, who says that with great power comes great responsibility. And this is in a way also reflected in the UN guiding principles, that when you are large and you have leverage, you also have a greater responsibility. Now, so what we as the World Benchmark Alliance do, we assess how the world's 2,000 most influential companies live up to that responsibility. So one example, you mentioned, Anouk, that only 4% of these 2,000 companies actually do something meaningful on living wage. The good news is, Anouk, it goes up by a few percent because we're doing the analysis again. So we'll be publishing that in January. But it's still a margin. It's still a very small group, and we indeed risk that if that group stays that small, that it becomes a comparative disadvantage because they take the risk, they make the investment, and there's a risk that they get undercut by their competitors. So I think it's really important that if we look at and this is a point about living wage, but I think it goes more broadly. So if we look at the Doha outcome document, it talks about the role of the private sector and the public sector to work towards a living wage. And that's great, that's progress. But roles that do not come with responsibility can never be accountable. So
how do we ensure that as a next step of this document, that we say, okay, when do we want to close this living wage gap? What is our 2050, like we have for climate? What is it for living wages? And what's then the responsibility of governments to get us there? And what's the responsibility of business to get us there? Because if this is a one-sided responsibility, because as we would say, like, oh, all governments need to raise minimum wage, and there is no responsibility with business, business will go to the places where labor is cheap.
Right.
If there's only a responsibility of business, it will never be achieved. So I think this is, we have made significant progress with this, and I think it's now time for ILO and others to take the next step and build on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Gerbrand. Anouk, would you like to comment on that? The timeline on closing the living wage gap. What should it be?
So that's
I know, but no, $1 million question. But perhaps you can give us your.
So we set a target by 2030 for all our tier 1 suppliers. So we have 48,000 suppliers. I don't think we'll be able to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
So to be honest, I don't believe in the year. I think you should have a wider ambition, as Gerbrand says, but the most important thing is the commitment itself, and that we start closing gaps and doing the work.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anouk. Next, I'd like to call on Mr. Richard Samans, Senior Economic Advisor at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Well, okay. Can you please stand up? It'll be easier, yeah. There, okay. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Very good discussion. We've heard a number of good examples of good or best practice. And responsible business conduct, one of the overarching issues hanging over this topic is how to go from good or best practice to customary practice. And this is ultimately a matter of good governance, responsible business conduct. It's public governance, and we're here at an intergovernmental conference, but it's also a matter of good corporate governance as well. And I think from our perspective, one needs, in order to travel that journey from good practice to customary practice, to push on several fronts at once. One is on the values front. And we heard some expositions here today of how some companies really have this embedded into their core values. And that's altogether appropriate. Companies are social constructs. They don't exist in the absence of legislation that have passed as a result of some sort of public governance process. And so that is all to the good. I think it's important for companies to be able to have a discussion about their purpose and their values, and embed that in their practices, irrespective of the legal and regulatory framework to some extent. Second of all, it's public policy and regulation is very important. And there are a number of dimensions to that. And indeed, living wage, its inclusion in the Intergovernmental Declaration here is important because it's a political signal. And a political signal is sort of one of the early stages of efforts in the public domain that eventually often ripples out into normative changes that have a much more scaled effect. And the one comment I would make in this regard to this recent colloquy between Anouk and Gerbrand and whatnot is that part of responsible business conduct for the corporate community is understanding that they have a stake in the strength of public norms and institutional capacities. And that is certainly the case here with respect to living wage. Kind of the question is, what happens to that political signal that's just been made here? What is needed is a process within countries, and companies should be part of this, we believe, whereby there is political support for the first steps to be taken, to do the analysis necessary, and to include the private sector in that deliberative analytical process going forward. And then you get into a more informed process of decision-making on how to align the minimum wage in a country to indeed a standard of living, a living wage, if you will. And then lastly, there are a couple of other important levers. One that we focused on is changing understanding in the corporate boardroom and the management suite about the inherent and often latent and uncaptured synergy for business value creation on a number of aspects of the responsible business conduct and social value. There are a lot of win-wins, 2-for-1s. But if you invest more in the skills of your workforce, you're more productive. If you address the well-being and safety and health, if you give your workers better voice, better agency, so you have better feedback loops, you get better productivity as well. There are a number of examples of this. Business and economics education, and I'm an economist, really need to embed this much more directly. Understand that good corporate governance is understanding those synergies between business value creation and responsible business conduct. That is more the exception than the norm currently. And I'll close here on what I would call standardized accountability. You know, the financial accounting grew out of basically iterative private best practice and academic and regulatory interplay. And that is what the sustainability reporting field has been going through. We're trying to navigate between avoiding over burdensome rules for smaller firms, for sure, but also recognizing that in the absence of strong public governance and norms, this dynamic of benchmarking and transparency on a consistent and comparable basis is potentially a very powerful way to, from the bottom up, to get change going. And this field has, and I'll close on this, has an interesting opportunity in this regard because you've got the Task Force for Inequality and Social Related Disclosure. To the extent that that exercise creates an internationally interoperable or baseline framework for a lot of the responsible conduct topics we're talking about today, that could have a powerful stimulus to the whole
Richard,
field.
thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Anyone want to briefly comment on what Richard said? Kristen?
Sure. I thank you for those comments. I think, well, there's two aspects here. One is, yes, I believe in good corporate governance. A lot of this is going to be driven by consumers, actually. And if especially you look at the younger generations, they don't want to just buy a widget. They want to buy a widget from a company that has social impact. So I think that's a step in the right direction. I think we just, as you said, need to be careful that we're not overly prescriptive with a lot of these regulations so that it doesn't hurt innovation.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that. Next, I'd like to call on Alfonso Palacios Torres, Vice President of Legal Affairs at the ANDI National Business Association of Colombia.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for being here and for sharing that wonderful ideas. I come from a Latin American region, which has a really difficult situation because the informality in as well. I mean, informality of the hiring of workers as well as companies, and we see like not an obstacle but a problem to solve. The big difference between small business and multinational or big companies, and the level of responsibility that could be put on the shoulders of those driving the creation of jobs and the development of a formal economy. So I would like to hear if you have some approach of some solutions in order to differentiate and make it visible as well as for big companies, as well for the small business to adopt and to carry on with those responsibilities that comes with the social aspects that we are discussing. For example, the living wage.
Thank you so much for that. I think, Kristen, you want to take that?
Sure. I think the solution lies in incorporating the business community in the multilateral system as these global standards are being set so that we can help avoid negative unintended consequences for those regions of the world, for innovative entrepreneurs there. So forums like the United Nations, like ECOSOC, like here in Doha today, it's very important that we listen to business organizations, whether it's ours or we have our German counterparts or our Colombian counterparts, to include the private sector voice, the actual business voice, because businesses do have a lot of innovative solutions that we can bring to the table, but we can't achieve these things in a vacuum. So this is the ideal platform to partner with the multilateral system to express those views.
Right. Nancy, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I would like to add that it's important. Yes, it's totally important to, that's why I was talking about knowing the ground. And yes, the social dialogue is important because the government should never accept to sometimes just take good idea from abroad that cannot be implemented
locally.
Locally.
Right.
So social dialogue is important for that, and be grounding to every country reality.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And finally, we'll hear from Ms. Bo Zhang, Senior Business Management Officer at the Office of the Chief of Partnerships Officer at AIIB. Sorry if I got that title
Thank you
wrong.
very much. Another female speaker here.
Amazing.
Yes, I'm from Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. AIIB is a multilateral development bank. Our mission is to foster the broad-based social and economic development through investing in infrastructure and other productive sector. So we take pride that the inclusive and sustainable infrastructure financing is at the heart of our operation. We think infrastructure is more than the concrete and steel, but more about people, about inclusion and shared prosperity. Therefore, AIIB include all the high standards of environmental, social, and governance into each and every stage of our investment cycle to work collaboratively with other multilateral development banks. We believe for private sectors, by adopting those high-level standards, they will not only benefit from risk mitigation, but they will also trigger their internal innovation, attract more capitals, and to achieve long-term resilience and sustainable growth. So by moving ahead, AIIB is committed to continue leverage our blended financing and the sustainable financing to help fill the financial gap that is badly needed by the private sector and to help them overcome the barrier, as Kristen just mentioned, of those high-level standards to achieve their sustainable growth. And in the meantime, we'll continue partnership with other development banks, UN agencies, governments, and of course, private sectors to make sure those high-level standards are translated into the daily operation, the actions on the ground.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for telling us about what you're doing at AIIB. Perhaps, Asma, you can talk a bit about that, comment on that, the private sector, how it can rely on the development banks and the multilateral financial institutions as well.
Okay. So within the context of what was discussed, I think small, medium enterprises are the most that come in need for financial aid and financial, let's say, partnerships with banks and similar providers to push the agenda of the business as well as the social development, where they can have access to resources, they can have better opportunities to thrive, and then better opportunities to leave a social impact and a developmental impact. If I would like to conclude what from all the rich discussions that we had today, is that there is no one size fits all. So when it comes to solving any problem, one of those is the social development element. It has to be looked at in isolation. Each country is different, each company is different, each sector is different. So while we can learn from each other, while we can look at best practices, and while we can share generic frameworks, it really comes to the responsibility of each business as a standalone unit to find the best framework for it to thrive and then be able to contribute to the social development goals. We cannot hold different businesses at different scales within different industries to the same level of accountability. Again, there is no one size fits all solution. It has to be particular, but we can benefit from each other.
There is no one size fits all solution. We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, ladies, for a very, very rich conversation. Really interesting to hear all of your thoughts. Thank you to all of our contributors for their valuable insights as well. Such a forward-looking discussion. And I hope it leads to concrete action on the ground in whatever regions you are, in whatever companies you are in. Thank you so much. Once again, a round of applause for our panelists, please. We're going to take I was told that before we head out to lunch, we will take a family photo with everyone here in this room. I don't know how we'll all fit on the stage, but we'll try. Thank you. Yes.